Welcome back to Media Week. Well, our co-host James Manning spoke to the Australian's editor Clive Matheson this week on the sidelines of the China-Australia Forum. Matheson was moderating a session for journalists at the gathering. James Manning asked him about the importance of international affairs in the newspaper's offering to readers.
Right from the very start, when Rupert set up the Australian, he wanted Australia to be an outward-looking place. He felt at the time Australia was very inward-looking, and on day one on the front page, Rupert Murdoch set out that this is a newspaper that will unashamedly tell people what's happening in their world. And when he said in their world, he meant the whole world. So we've focused very heavily for the past 50 years on our international offering on our world pages. We've always had obviously a world foreign editor and a foreign news editor. Currently in the paper, we devote at least two usually fairly clean pages every day to world. Obviously that waxes and wanes a little bit with events. If you have a big event like Iraq and Syria at the moment, then we'll devote a lot more of that to the front page. Interestingly, as we were sort of looking back over 50 years for our recent birthday, we were looking at front pages. There was a lot of international news back in the very early days too. The best, I think, the paper was launched as Vietnam was ramping up, so there was a lot of those stories. And Rupert really wanted to be focused on Asia. He wanted to sort of not sever the ties with old Europe, but he wanted it to be focused on our region in our time zone, and that's what we try to do. So. More recently, as sort of all media outlets have had to re-evaluate their overseas bureaus, we've tried very determinedly to hold on to those, particularly those in this zone. So obviously we've still got people in Beijing, we've got people in Jakarta, and Delhi, which three very important markets for us, and there's certainly no intention to wind that back any further.
Just tell us a little bit about the specific brief, if you like, to your China correspondent. I guess it's a bit of two-way traffic. You want to find out about news coming out of China, but then also he sort of researches responses to what's happening in Australia over there. Is that right?
That's well put. We're very lucky in that we've got the Wall Street Journal and the Times as sister newspapers. So, the great volume of work and the fantastic coverage of events on the ground, we're very well served by that. So the brief to the correspondents is a little bit narrower, perhaps. You've got to look at it through Australian eyes. You've got to look at it with the sensitivities of what our readers are looking for from that coverage, and that's not just about finding if there's a victim, find an Australian. It really is what are the big issues in Australia, and how does that relate to what's happening in those countries? So, if our Jakarta correspondent, for example, they do a lot of work on asylum seekers in the last couple of years. There was obviously a lot with the cattle trade, and then economic and business ties. In China as well, there's a lot of debate here about what is our contribution to climate change, what is our contribution in terms of reducing our carbon emissions. Maybe the China correspondent can be looking at what China's doing from that point of view, and that is a big topic here for our readers. Obviously foreign investment, obviously business ties, but wage comparisons, labour comparisons. I mean, those things that sort of have some sort of play back here in Australia.
Not traditionally seen as a sexy part of the newspaper offer to its readers, but for a journal like the Australian, a serious thing that a lot of your readers probably depend on you for.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. You say sexy. I mean, some of the. I mean, if you have a look at what comes over from internationally, sometimes it can make the local coverage look pretty mundane and dull. While we're locked in this endless round of budget debate, you look at what's happening in Iraq and Syria, and you look at what's happening in Gaza and Israel. So, I mean, those things, they're not sexy by any stretch, but they're the big news events, and any newspaper should be covering those. Sometimes with greater emphasis than what we do on very parochial issues at home. We're on our commentary pages, we often run international commentary. We have a world comment every day. Again, we're very well served by the Journal and the Times. But we do look for regional comments to run in that space. We don't ignore the international events in our editorial space. So we are very much engaged. We don't do that classic, as we've repeatedly warned the Tsar, but we do actually, sort of have a view on, sort of Russian aggression in Ukraine, or, the changes of government in various parts of the world. What, social democratic parties are waning. What does that mean for, for the region, for the world? So, we do put a lot of effort into it. It's a big part of our conferences in the morning. We don't just rush through the world list. We actually have a discussion about what's going on. Okay. And I think our readers are interested in it. One of the biggest stories last year on the website was Richard III's bones. You know, and that's just because it came out of nowhere, but the readers responded, and the traffic that we get to things we write about, you know, Israel and Gaza and about Islamic State. I mean, you know, we know that readers are deeply engaged with those topics.
Having been to one of these before, and you're hosting a session this afternoon, when you sit down and you eyeball your colleagues across the room, it really brings home the sensitivities you need to understand too when you're covering a place like China. It's not as all cut and dried as you think sometimes, and just judging it from afar. That's
right. And then just in that session we just had, you know, talking about, you know, just reminding you that a lot of the media is still state-owned, and there are private bodies coming through, but so they do see the world in a slightly different way. And look, frankly, I know the Australian is sometimes, our Chinese friends sometimes confuse it as a paper owned by the state. It's called The Australian, and you know, when we write something, they assume sometimes that that's the, you know, the Australian position, and you do have to explain. Private company, we don't have to agree with the government. So yeah, there are definite sensitivities, but you know, you can see the goodwill, and you know, everyone, you know, they want to, you know, we all want to improve ties. We want to understand each other's countries better. Frankly, you know, I haven't spent enough time in China. I don't understand as well as I should, and that's why a forum like this is terrific.
That is all we have time for. James Manning, editor and publisher of Mediaweek, our guest host as always. And from the team here, thanks for your company.